At 6:43 a.m. on October 25, 1944, Ensign William Brooks was flying a TBM Avenger on a routine scouting mission when he saw something unexpected. Several thousand feet below him, clear as day, he saw a fleet of Japanese surface ships, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, steaming southeast out of San Bernardino Strait at 30 knots. By chance, he had found Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, which was on its way to Leyte Gulf. Checking his charts, Brooks noticed that Kurita's ships were only 20 miles from his escort carrier, which belonged to Taffy 3, a support group stationed off the island of Samar. To his horror, Brooks realized that Taffy 3 was directly in their way. As anti-aircraft fire puffed around his TBM, he promptly radioed a message to his escort carrier, USS St. Lo, reporting what he had seen. On Taffy 3's flagship, USS Fanshawe Bay, Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague heard Brooks' radio message and promptly asked him to confirm his report. Sprague could not imagine that a Japanese surface fleet could be so close. Surely Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet would have given them warning of any impending disaster. Not in the mood to have his eyesight questioned, Brooks replied, "I can see the pagoda masts, and I can see the biggest red meatball flag I ever saw flying on the biggest battleship I ever saw." Suddenly, the truth of the matter became clear. Halsey's Third Fleet must have abandoned the strait. Sprague took stock of his situation. Taffy 3 consisted of 6 Casablanca-class escort carriers, 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, and 4 John C. Butler-class destroyer-escorts. There were 2 other support groups farther south, Taffy 1 and Taffy 2. The nearest one, Taffy 2, was at least 20 miles away. But none of the Taffys were in any condition to take on an enemy surface task force. Any one of Kurita's 4 battleships had more guns than all of Taffy 3's ships combined. Taffy 3 mounted nothing larger than a 5-inch gun. Each ship's armor was appallingly weak, and the escort carriers couldn't move faster than 19 knots, only half the speed of the Japanese battleships. Further, most of the attack aircraft on the escort carriers were armed with anti-personnel weapons, not ship-killing bombs or torpedoes. If Taffy 3 stayed where it was, every single ship would be slaughtered. Something had to be done quickly, or the next hour would result in unmitigated disaster. At 6:50, Sprague ordered his ships to change course to the east. There was a rain squall not far away. If his ships could get into it, they might be able to dodge the Japanese shells. He also ordered the destroyers to deploy smoke screens between the escort carriers and the Japanese ships, which would, theoretically, spoil the enemy's aim. 5 minutes later, Sprague ordered all available aircraft scrambled. If his escort carriers went down, he did not want any valuable aircraft to go down with them. In another 5 minutes, the Japanese ships came over the horizon, steaming in 4 columns. When Kurita sighted Taffy 3, he ordered his battleships and heavy cruisers to engage the American carriers, which he wrongly believed were a group of Essex-class fleet carriers. He did not quite realize that Taffy 3's purpose was to provide air cover for the landings on Leyte, but because it stood in his way, Kurita believed it had to be dealt with. The super battleship Yamato began firing its 18-inch guns, and soon the battleships Nagato, Haruna, and Congo joined in. At the edge of Taffy 3, giant waterspouts erupted. Eerily, each plume was a different color. The Japanese used dye to help their gunners check their aim. Seaman Second Class Jack Hewson was a sailor on USS Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort. He remembered the opening moments of the battle.
General quarters sounded. We all went to our battle stations. We thought it was a drill, but our gun captain on my 40mm said, "Take off the covers! Move! This is no drill!" And then the captain got on the loudspeaker and said, "Shipmates, there's a large Japanese battleship and cruiser force coming at us from San Bernardino Strait. We will do our duty. The outcome is very doubtful." And with that we heard, boom, boom, boom. The Japanese battleships Yamato and Nagato were opening up at 19 miles away, and we could hear them coming because those shells were huge. They had an 18-inch on Yamato, about as heavy as a compact car. It came right over us. Well, they were coming down at us at 30 knots. In the middle were the 4 battleships, on the outskirts were the 8 cruisers, and on the outskirts of them, 11 destroyers. The best speed our jeep carriers could manage was 16 knots at best. In my little young mind, I didn't realize this was really something.
One destroyer on the edge of the formation, USS Johnston, didn't have time to run for cover. As it made smoke, it turned northwest and barreled into the Japanese fleet. Bravely, Johnston's skipper directed his ship to charge at the port-side Japanese column, which consisted of 4 heavy cruisers. Zigzagging through shell splashes, Johnston aimed for the lead ship, the Kumano, and the crew fired a spread of 10 torpedoes. One of these caught Kumano right in the bow, ripping it off. But Johnston's heroic charge didn't last long. A few minutes later, a salvo of 14-inch armor-piercing shells caught Johnston in the engine room, followed by a salvo of 6-inch shells that struck the bridge. Badly mauled, Johnston turned around, limping eastward to catch up with Taffy 3. At 7:40, it became clear that the Japanese ships were gaining on Taffy 3, and if Sprague didn't do something to slow them down, his escort carriers would not make it to the squall. Yelling into the TBS radio, he ordered his destroyers to make a torpedo attack. He said simply, "Small boys, attack!" 3 skippers, Commander Leon Kintberger, Commander Amos Hathaway, and Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, responded to Sprague's orders. Their ships, USS Hull, Heermann, and Samuel B. Roberts, dropped out of formation and formed a new line heading northwest, moving to engage the incoming battleships and cruisers. Along the way, these destroyers passed the Johnston, which was limping east after its lopsided encounter with the Japanese battleship line. Although Johnston had no more torpedoes, it joined the column to provide fire support. Sitting at the 40-millimeter gun on the bow of Samuel B. Roberts, Jack Hewson remembered the run toward the Japanese line.
Admiral Sprague saw they were catching up on us, and that's when he made his command. "Small boys, attack!" And we all turned around and were going in for torpedo runs straight at them. It just so happened that the Johnston, the Heermann, and the Hull, the 3 heavy destroyers, were in front of us when we did our maneuvers. So we formed right behind those 3 heavy destroyers, which were much bigger than us. They carried 10 torpedoes, 2 mounts, and they were peeling off already. That's how close they were. The Japanese were about 10,000 yards away then. You could see them. So the Johnston went off on one ship, the Hull went off on another, the Heermann went off on another one. And then there was us. You can't believe the noise, the shells coming in. And then we saw the Chokai. Skipper Bob Copeland went right for it. Where I was in the 40-millimeter, right in front of the bridge, it was like sitting at home plate in a baseball diamond. You see everything. All of a sudden, I looked, and everybody on our guns looked, and the cruisers' 2 forward mounts, 2 barrels in each turret, 8-inch, were turning toward us. You could see them turning. And they were aiming right at us. And they let go with a salvo. Those 8-inch shells came right over us. They couldn't get their guns depressed, as we were a small ship. We fired our fish, and then made a big starboard turn to get the hell out of there. And Bob Copeland called down to his engineering officer, Lieutenant Herbert Trowbridge. He said, "Tro, give me all you got. Don't worry about the revolutions, because we're never going to use them again." He knew something I didn't know.
At 7:40, the 4 small boys came abreast of their targets, but the Japanese made them pay for getting so close. Hull took a salvo to its bridge. In an instant, shrapnel eviscerated 4 sailors in the wheelhouse, disintegrating them into an unnatural green mist. After taking this brutal hit, Hull fired its spread of 10 torpedoes at the battleship Congo, but none of them made contact. USS Heermann came next. It fired a spread of 7 torpedoes at the cruiser Hagoro. The other 3 torpedoes had fired prematurely during the approach. These torpedoes missed, whizzing underneath the starboard cruiser line, but providentially, they tracked toward the battleship line. With the torpedoes closing in, Yamato went into a tight turn, slowing its advance and dropping out of formation. The Heermann's gun crews exchanged fire with the Haruna, which straddled the tiny destroyer with waterspouts, but the lucky ship survived its jousting match without taking any damage. After that, Samuel B. Roberts tried its luck. As a Japanese shell crashed through its rigging, Roberts closed to within 4,000 yards of its target, the heavy cruiser Chokai, and the crew fired torpedoes. A diminutive 306-foot destroyer-escort, Roberts had only 3 torpedoes available. But the Americans made their shots count. One of them struck the stern of Chokai, blowing it off. As Chokai halted its advance, a wild cheer arose from the crew of the Roberts. They knew they had scored a serious hit. As the small boys bought time, Sprague's escort carriers entered the rain squall and executed a hard turn to starboard. At 8 a.m., they came out of the squall heading southwest. Sprague's only hope was to get close to Taffy 2, 20 miles south, and receive friendly support. But the Japanese cruisers and battleships were on their tail, and as they emerged from the southern edge of the squall, the escort carriers started taking hits. At 8:05, an 8-inch shell tore through USS Kalinin Bay. Over the next half hour, 10 more hits slammed into the superstructure, destroying the radar and radio equipment. Sprague's flagship, USS Fanshawe Bay, took 4 hits, and USS White Plains was rocked by underwater explosions from Yamato's shells, flooding the bilges. But USS Gambier Bay took the worst of the punishment. At 8:37, the Japanese scored a direct hit on the pilot house, knocking out the ship's steering. 3 minutes later, another large shell struck a boiler in the aft engine room. Power flickered off, water flooded in, and Gambier Bay started to list. The damaged destroyer Johnston came to its rescue, and it deterred a torpedo attack, but it was too late for the stricken carrier, as the water rushed in and caused Gambier Bay to capsize to port. At 9:07, it rolled over and went under in just a few minutes. Gambier Bay lost 131 men from its 900-man crew. Meanwhile, the small boys found themselves trapped in between the line of Japanese battleships and the line of Japanese cruisers. They were unable to reunite with the escort carriers or the 3 destroyer escorts that still protected them. USS Hull found itself caught in a hellish crossfire, taking hits from the battleship Congo and the cruisers Tone, Chikuma, and Hagoro. At least 40 shells tore through the ship, including a destructive salvo from Congo that hit below the waterline. The torpedo mounts were blown off the ship, the bridge collapsed on itself, the mast was torn away, one stack was blown off, the engine room flooded, and the 40mm ammunition locker exploded, setting the stern in flames. For a few harrowing minutes, Hull was nothing more than a charnel house, a drifting hunk of steel full of mangled, dying men. Commander Kintberger ordered abandon ship, but not before the explosions claimed the lives of 210 of his sailors. At 8:55, Hull went down by the stern. Another 40 men perished in the water, and only 86 were eventually rescued. USS Samuel B. Roberts was caught in the same trap. Frantically, its 2 5-inch guns fired at Chikuma, with the aft gun sending more than 320 rounds downrange. At 8:51, the Japanese got their first hit on Roberts when they knocked out the aft 5-inch gun and the adjacent 40mm. After the 5-inch gun exploded, its captain, gunner's mate 3rd Class Paul Carr, was found cradling the next shell scheduled to be loaded. Although torn open from neck to groin, he heroically tried to stand up and load the final round until loss of blood ended his life. Not long after, a salvo of 14-inch shells from Congo tore a massive 50-foot hole in Roberts' port side, just aft of the engine room. Still at his post at the 40mm, Seaman Hewson recalled the action.
Oh my God. This is a fight to the finish. Bob Copeland sighted a couple of cruisers, and we started going in close. They were firing right over us, and we started firing our 2 5-inch guns. We were so close that they couldn't get down to us. The shells were coming right over our heads. You could see them. Meantime, our gun back aft was hitting these cruisers. Now, a 5-inch shell would bounce off their hull, but he was hitting them in the upper works, the exposed gun turrets, the bridge, anything. And all of a sudden, we felt this wham! And that's when we took our first hit, back aft. It was a salvo from a cruiser, and it hit the same type of gun that I was on, the 40mm back aft. And when the smoke cleared, there was nothing there. The gun mount was gone, half the torpedo tubes were gone. All those men were just disintegrated from that heavy caliber shell.
With no other option, Lieutenant Commander Copeland ordered abandoned ship. In another 30 minutes, Roberts went under, taking with it 90 men to a watery grave, and also the ship's mascot, Little Sammy, a small, black-furred puppy. Houston was among those who jumped into the turbulent water.
So about that time, here comes Dougherty up from the stern. He was in his whites and had his life jacket on. He said, "Come on, Jack, we gotta go." We both look, and a guy's coming up from the stern. He's walking past us, and I never got to see his face, because as he walked by me, he had no left shoulder and no left arm, just a big gap. And as he walked by, Dougherty and I just looked. I mean, I was just staring at what wasn't there. And then, as we were taking on more water, Dougherty said, "We gotta go." And I said, "Let's go." So we jumped in the water. Only had about 6 feet to go. There was oil all over, and we started to swim. We knew enough, as young kids, that we had to get away from the ship to avoid the suction. And we swam around the back end of the ship, and depth charges were in the water already. We looked around again at where a shell had blown Dougherty's gun apart, and there was nothing left of the gun. That's when we knew, boy, this is for real.
Meanwhile, the beleaguered USS Johnston continued to circle in and out, chasing shell splashes, powered only by one engine and its manual steering. At 9:40, Johnston finally lost power, and Commander Ernest Evans ordered abandoned ship. Japanese cruisers closed in on it, and in a final spectacular salvo, they sent it under. Altogether, 186 sailors on that ship perished, including Commander Evans. As the battle on the surface raged in all its fury, overhead, U.S. carrier planes harassed the Japanese ships. All the aviators who had taken off from the escort carriers at the battle's outset remained on station to add their firepower. By 8:45, a wave of aircraft from nearby Taffy 2 assisted in strafing the Japanese warships. Few of the pilots carried any devastating ordnance, only anti-personnel weapons normally used to bomb shore emplacements. Indeed, some of the TBM pilots had no ordnance at all, just empty bomb bays. But they swung their doors open, making mock torpedo runs simply to sow confusion in the Japanese ranks. But the American aviators claimed a few hits. Early in the engagement, 10 TBMs attacked the cruiser Suzuya, damaging its propeller. At 10:50, a second wave of planes, 30 in number, dropped bombs that detonated Suzuya's torpedo mount, causing its torpedoes to explode. Unable to contain the fires, the crew abandoned ship, and Suzuya sank later on in the afternoon. Meanwhile, at 9:05, 4 TBMs from USS Kitkun Bay hit Chokai's damaged stern with armor-piercing bombs, bringing that cruiser to a dead halt. Finally, Chikuma fell under attack by 4 TBMs from Taffy 2. Hit by an aerial torpedo that disabled one screw and the rudder, Chikuma stopped dead in the water as well. Chikuma's captain reported his ship's damage to Kurita at 9:07, roughly the same time as the sinking of Gambier Bay. This news did not sit well with the frustrated Japanese admiral. Already, he had lost 1 battleship and 4 cruisers just trying to reach this location, and now he had to subtract 3 more. His formation had been broken up by the fighting, and he also had to analyze the disappointing news from the southern force at Surigao Strait. Operation Shogo 1 could not proceed without the Southern Force. Any further advance from the Center Force would be a waste of life. At 9:11, he sent a message to all his ships. Rendezvous, my course north, speed 20 knots. With that, Yamato began turning around, leading the Center Force back to San Bernardino Strait. Kurita allowed his cruisers to linger long enough to finish off USS Samuel B. Roberts, but beyond that, the attack on Leyte Gulf was canceled. But the anguish was not over yet. Due to reluctance from the 7th Fleet's commanders to send rescue ships into the danger zone, most of the survivors from the wrecked destroyers were adrift for the next 2 days. USS Samuel B. Roberts had 55 survivors clinging to a net. One by one, they began to disappear. Seaman Houston remembered,
That night, too many guys were drinking salt water. We had one guy that was going like, well, I'm going down to the mess hall to have breakfast. And in actuality, he's trying to drown himself. We tried to stop a couple of guys, and boy, they hit us hard. One said, oh, there's Mom on the porch. And he swam away, and we never saw him again. And then that night, 4 guys said, we're leaving. We're going to try it on our own. We told them, stay with us, safety in numbers. But nope, we're going to try for land. And they left, and we never saw them again.
After 50 hours adrift, Houston and the other survivors from Roberts were finally rescued. In the final tally, the U.S. Navy lost 1,161 sailors killed or missing in action at Samar. It had been a disastrous engagement, resulting in the loss of 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer-escort, and 23 aircraft. But as of noon on October 25th, thanks to Taffy 3's plucky resistance, Kurita's center force was in retreat. Leyte Gulf was, at last, secured. Years later, famed historian Samuel Eliot Morison summed up the Battle of Samar this way. He wrote, in no engagement in its entire history has the United States Navy shown more gallantry, guts, and gumption than in those 2 morning hours between 7:30 and 9:30 off Samar. Even today, anyone would be hard-pressed to doubt those words.